So, as I said before, tonight we're going to talk about plan unit development rezones. So, part of the process that we are getting prepared for is an update to the zoning map. So, this is the end of the full update to the zoning text that was adopted in April of this year, and then the accompanying map that comes along with that. So, this is part of that process. One of the things we did was look at the existing plan unit developments in town. So plan unit developments, if you don't know what they are, they're unique zoning regulations for particular groups of parcels. They're intended to promote a mix of uses or a unique design that would otherwise be difficult or not able to be accomplished within the zoning code. So basically each plan unit development is its own small zoning code. Currently in the city, we have over 100 plan unit developments, 119, I believe. The city, so obviously we have to administer codes for each of those separately. Many of the areas are expected to be rezoned to base zoning districts with this update, and that's what we've proposed to do. So the story map discusses the proposed changes to many of our existing PUDs. That's what this little presentation is, and it will go up on the website after today, as well as me describing it, and any questions that we are able to answer tonight will go up as well. I will be showing you an example PUD here in a little bit to give you an idea of how they're administered now, what kind of issues they cause for property owners and staff, and as an explanation of partially why this rezone is being brought forward. So you can use the tools in this story map to learn about areas that are currently PUD. If you have not used these maps yet, there's an expand tool in the top right that allows you to explore the maps, kind of hides the text. You can also use this, magnifying glass in the top left to type in an address. If you're looking to see if a property that you are interested in or own, or for some reason just want to know about, is part of the PUD discussion. So here we have our current PUDs shown in gray. And then this layer shows what we are proposing to change them to. We are not proposing to change all of our existing PUDs, so we'll discuss that here shortly. But the large majority, we are proposing to go to straight zoning districts from the code. And then you can use these buttons to zoom in to the different areas. And then also the map is interactive, so you can grab and move around and zoom in down on the bottom right as well. And then in this story map, we've also included a link to a table of the existing PUDs that we analyzed. So basically, it has information in the table, including a PUD identification number that we use and the PUD name that was used as well. The last zoning on the parcel, the zoning that we're recommending, and then a comment explaining our proposal or what is at the site currently. So to discuss briefly, why are PUDs being rezoned? So the Unified Development Ordinance is our zoning laws here in Bloomington. We have had a Unified Development Ordinance since 2007 and had a different zoning code previous to that as well. We've had zoning since the 70s. The Unified Development Ordinance has stipulations that are written with the expectation that PUDs will be reviewed and expired when certain thresholds are met, including after a period of inactivity or if the PUD is no longer operating within the guidelines of the PUD or certain build out percentages. So we have included those triggers here so that you can see what those are and what rubric we use to decide whether or not it was appropriate to recommend a rezone. So the first is that at least 95% of the PUD has been built out. The second is showing that the preliminary plan, which is basically one of the first steps in getting a PUD that creates the district, that those are to be considered abandoned if 3 years after the approval by council, no final plan, or what sometimes people refer to as site plan, has been granted. And then the third is that 10 years after approval of that initial rezone preliminary plan, that final plans have started, but there are sections that are still not finished. And the final one is just if the PUD is no longer proceeding in accordance with the original district ordinance, commitments or time requirements that are approved at the same time as the preliminary plan. So we looked at 119 PUDs, as I mentioned, and we are recommending rezone of 104. And each of them falls under at least one of the 4 triggers above. And then we will go through a real world example shortly. So it has been in the regulations that this needs to be reviewed periodically. And for various reasons that hasn't been done. It's quite a big undertaking. So we decided that this was an appropriate time to do that. It used to be much more difficult than it is now. So you can see here, we've explained why. So for example, in order to determine that a PUD is 95% built out, we would have to, of course, review all case files, and some of the PUDs are quite old and have been amended a number of times. So that is actually a fairly laborious process. Building permits to see what has been built there, and then visiting the site to verify what we could find. So, now that we have much easier access to orthophotography than we did, 20 and 25 years ago, it's easier for staff, though it is still time consuming, to do some of those reviews and get those processes done. And then additionally, in order to rezone something, in order to rezone property, obviously notice has to be given. And so during this zoning map process, we are already sending notice to the entire city. So it seemed like an appropriate time to include that with the notice that we would already be sending out, and obviously using taxpayer dollars to fund, and a way to update the map to have it be more relevant and current. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go over an example because I think it might be difficult to understand a little bit, or saying if you're not used to kind of living in the planning and zoning world. So this, I think, is a good example that staff found and identified, and we'll just quickly go through it. So one of our existing 119 PUDs is a PUD that is actually where Kroger at Kinzer and the Bypass is located. So it was originally reviewed by Plan Commission in 1991 to be created to turn into a PUD. And so the original intent was for the PUD to be designed in order to create a neighborhood shopping area to be able to serve the nearby residential development. And previously it had been zoned for single family residential. So PUD was created, and during that process, a site plan was approved through the development plan process, showing that the idea for the PUD would that there'd be a large grocery store, anchor store on the west end, and then smaller commercial development on the east end with parking in the center. So if you're familiar with the site, you know that that is how it has developed. The building orientation is slightly different for the small retail, but the intent and development ideas for the PUD have been met. So for plan unit developments, they're designed with the regulations and language that are in the zoning ordinance at the time that they're approved. So that makes sense, of course, but as we go on in time and we update the zoning code, and then we initiated the Unified Development Ordinance, which changed the code format quite a bit, then those become obsolete. So a PUD, as I said before, is created so that minor changes can be allowed to maybe a use list or development standards because that the developer is looking for, that wouldn't be allowed through just typical base zoning districts. So the ones that are always in our zoning code, that they couldn't rezone to one of our other commercial because it wasn't going to meet the desires of the site property owner. So in this case, this particular PUD features a list of land uses that are allowed in Area A on the eastern portion of the lot. And there was at one time discussion of having an outlot there, so that area is included. And then the PUD also has a maximum square footage restriction per use in Area A. So again, more details than the existing code had at the time, a different list of uses than the code had at the time, and that's what they requested from council and were approved. So some PUDs often contain a list of excluded uses. So they may say have identified the BA zoning district, which was a zoning district at the time, and said we would like to use all of those uses except for, and then list the ones that they are willing to exclude. And ask council to allow them to maybe do something else, have higher density or more impervious surface coverage or something in order, and then giving up potential uses for that. The issue is that those lists of excluded uses are still in effect today. So when someone calls to develop in a PUD, or someone's trying to do due diligence on their own to find out what kind of uses are allowed, these are the types of documents we have to pull up every time for each PUD. And over time that gets to be tedious, and they get amended, and it's becomes fairly difficult to track and to be able to expediently give accurate information to the public. Another issue is because the code changes over time, a lot of the uses listed in these older use and excluded use tables no longer exist. So that also makes implementation a little difficult for a property owner to see what they are allowed to do. And then, as we discussed, development standards can also be included. So in this particular PUD, regulations that were common at the time and that no longer meet the goals of our current long range plan, the comprehensive plan, or other goals that have kind of grown since this PUD was first approved, such as environmental and architectural goals, are still regulating this property. So any potential development at this site does have to meet the development standards that are current that are currently in that PUD that have remained from 1991. So that can cause some conflict with goals of the community as well. So if, for example, at this PUD, this is a pretty big deviation from our current UDO. And there's an expectation in this PUD that parking will be allowed in front. That used to be obviously the way that many commercial areas were designed. And this PUD perpetuates that, even though the city code has, the UDO has reversed that and asked for buildings to be built forward for some time now. So again, because each PUD can call out which things they do and don't want to meet from the code that is in place at the time, that can make administration difficult. It becomes more time consuming for property owners and others doing due diligence, even just for insurance updates and things where they're trying to make sure the properties are in line with land regulations because they can't easily find those things themselves online. Okay, so as we mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of an issue that is just has been created because of a lack of expiring these PUDs. So they are not actually intended to exist in perpetuity. So we have identified 104 PUDs that we think should be eligible to be retired. And by retired, we mean put into one of the regular zoning districts. And again, based on those 4 criteria that are near the beginning of the story map. We looked at those, compared the goals and objectives of the original PUD, the use standards as well, to the comprehensive plan, and then found base zoning districts from the code that best match those goals, and identified districts from the code that would make sense for the new rezone. So in this example, as we talked about at the beginning of the example, the original goal of the PUD was to be able to create a large anchor grocery store and then allow for outlot development as well. The comprehensive plan calls for this area to be urban corridor, which also allows for a mixture of commercial and mixed use development. And so the department identified that this site should be, we think this site should be rezoned to mixed use corridor, MC, which is our most intense commercial district that matches what is happening on site, what was intended to happen on site. And then any development that happens in the future would now have to meet the use standards and development standards of the MC district. So instead of going back to the PUD every time someone wants to do development on this site, to check if there are any exceptions for setbacks or uses or any number of things that could have been approved by council, different from regular zoning code. Instead, we can go to the MC district and use the standard development standards and use list. And that is helpful for us, of course, but is also very helpful for prospective buyers and property owners to be able to find that information themselves, and not have to go through lengthy processes to change those requirements as they become outdated. So we have 119, we're planning to rezone 104. So we still have a handful left. The idea is that we will begin reviewing them on a yearly basis. So it will be the identical review to what we did here. So we will check the status of build out for each PUD, make sure that none have met any of the 4 thresholds that we mentioned at the beginning. And if they have, then we will present those through the Plan Commission to the council to recommend rezoning to existing base zoning districts when that's appropriate. And so we will kind of be resetting the PUD review button here and becoming more in line with what the regulations had in mind as far as how long PUDs should be good for and how long a developer should have to be able to get them off the ground. So I am going to ask Senior Planner Eric Grulich if he has anything to add about the process of how we identified. So that was a general, and then a very general discussion of how the PUD rezone designations were chosen, and then very specific discussion about one. But we may have more comment kind of about how others were done in the city as well.
Thank you, Jackie. So certainly there are a mix of PUDs within the city, and the example that you gave was the one on North Kinzer, and the bypass was a commercial PUD. There were also residential PUDs. So there are a mix of those PUDs throughout the city. And so what we tried to do was look at the approved standards, look at the approved uses, also look for what the designation of the comprehensive plan was, to try to figure out what would be the best match for a new zoning district to replace the PUD. So a lot of times the residential, and certainly something else to point out was that there weren't zoning districts in place at the time that some of these PUDs were made. So the reduced setbacks, for instance, the reduced lot sizes wouldn't have been allowed under those codes. So we do have current zoning districts that do allow for reduced setbacks and lot sizes that are more in keeping in what match what's been done on the ground. So, you know, we basically use, like I said, the use table, the development standards that the development was built around, and the comprehensive plan to try to match that up to the current zoning districts to the best that we could.
Great, thank you. So yeah, one thing that you could see from the zoning map, actually, let me go back from the proposed zoning map. One pretty noticeable change is that there is quite a bit. We had a number of PUDs that did not actually meet the intent any longer of what PUDs are supposed to be now in our current code, right? Which is mixed use and allowing for unique development. So we have a lot of PUDs, or we have a handful of large area of PUDs on the east side that is basically single family or slightly more intense than single family. So we have proposed that a number of those be rezoned to R2, which is one of our single family residential districts. Otherwise, besides the large kind of R2 swath out here, we have, of course, Sudbury on the west side of town, where we had a vision plan done for that area with suggested zoning from our new zoning districts by Smith Associates out of Indianapolis. And so that has been populated here as well. And that PUD, if this map goes forward and is what is approved by council, would go away allowing for immediate by right development if they could meet the zoning code requirements for the districts we've recommended, which do include some of the R4 area and other residential. And then we have a couple of some of the PUDs. I'm sorry if this is a repeat. I missed it if Eric said this, but the handful of PUDs we did not change were for various reasons. Some are brand new or have ongoing development in them. So they are still well within the kind of expected predicted timeline for PUDs, and others have very complicated districts where it would have district requirements where it actually may have been, or it was quite difficult to identify districts from our zoning code that would be able to be replaced into those PUD areas. So those were left. So some of those will probably be around for some time, and others are just in different states of development and will be reviewed on the annual basis. Okay, so that's what we have for our presentation. And if you came in, if you weren't here at the beginning, if you have questions, that's great. We would love to answer them. Please use your chat function and send questions to either Ryan Roebling or Keegan Gulick, and they will turn on their mics and read them aloud if they get any. And we will do our best to answer them here. If we can't get them answered, we will compile them and get answers up on the website as we're putting together information to respond to kind of all of these information meetings and the questions we've been getting. Does anybody have any particular questions about PUDs? Oh, Ryan, do you have something?
Yeah, I have a couple questions from the B Square Beacon. First one is, did planning staff reach out to PUD property owners as part of this process?
I would say on the whole, we did not. We have talked about it. There are so many property owners in the city who are having their zoning recommended to be changed, not just PUD owners, that the general notice that will go to each property owner before the plan commission process starts will be the notice that they get. We have had some discussions with particular owners if we were in discussion with them for another reason, if we knew that they were planning to come forward with something or they were in discussion with us about development. I think that pretty much answers it. But Eric, if I miss anything, please feel free to chime in. Okay. What else? Did you have another one?
Yeah, I have a couple. Same question, or this one's from Dave as well. So why ME for the Kroger site instead of MC? Or I think he got it backward, but so we have it as MC. I think he might be asking why not ME.
Why not mixed use employment? Eric, go ahead.
Well, so the employment, the mixed use employment district is supposed to be for obviously high employment generating uses. The use list for that PUD was based on commercial and retail. It was not a use list that was based on employment. This location and the development really lends itself more towards neighborhood serving commercial uses. It's got great access. So the use list really is kind of what generated that recommendation for this being mixed use corridor.
Okay, next one.
Is there any difference in the process for the Brownstone Terrace PUD on one hand and the PUD that was discussed at last night's Plan Commission meeting? Or is this the same process with a different conclusion by planning staff on a recommendation?
So both of those, the Brownstone Terrace and the Bill Brown petition, were requests to rezone a PUD to a current zoning district. So it's somewhat different than this process because that individual property is being discussed, not the city zoning map as a whole. But it still is kind of the same process, has to go to the Plan Commission, has to go to the City Council. So they are similar in some regards.
And I think we've said this, I think at another meeting, but once the map goes to council, they will only be able to approve it or deny it. So they can't offer amendment. So obviously there's a lot more to kind of iron out with there being so many properties involved than there might be on the kind of one property rezone requests that we usually get. Brian, do you have other stuff?
Yep. Does the Plan Commission have to take up the zone map revisions all in one go with a single map change? Or could the Plan Commission take up at least two separate map changes, one that would handle the new R4 district and one that would take care of the PUDs, for example?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that question, but we can find out. I don't know offhand because I would say that's atypical. And the process for a full map replace and repeal is different than a smaller rezone. And so what you've asked about is kind of an in-between. So I'm not sure, or not the process, but the, oh shoot. Yeah, let us look into that and we will post that. I will also say to that part of the zoning map is that it's a whole piece, right? So the R4 in particular is fairly unpopular. We see it kind of as part of making sense as part of a package. So like, for example, with the mixed-use student housing districts. So I would assume would prefer to take it in as whole cloth. And additionally, if we split them, I think we probably could, but of course it would be two entirely separate processes. So it would be like a double notification of everyone in the city, double hearings. We could do that. I don't know. That I'm not sure that that's something we would pursue, but I think it would be technically possible. Given the up or down decision that the city council will have to make on any map changes, it looks like it might be possible that the PUD revisions could founder on other concerns that aren't related to specific PUD districts. Those districts would be like the placement of R4. Yeah, was that a question? Okay, yes, that's true. So we yes. So if there are sticking points in the map that the council ultimately obviously makes the decision, if there are sticking points that they can't come to an agreement on, then yes, if it goes in as one ordinance, then it would obviously stop the whole ordinance. So reason we're presenting them in this way is because kind of to Dave's first question, if you are a PUD owner and you want to ask questions, it's easier probably to have these nights where it's just about the PUDs and there's only 25 of us here than asking those questions at a meeting where there's 100 people and they're almost all there to ask questions about residential uses. So they're split up in these kind of information sessions just to maybe give more opportunity to people who have questions about the less popular changes, or not popular, but the less discussed changes in the community. But yes, they will go through as one. Keegan, okay. You have something? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I do have a question.
Great.
This question is it possible to rezone part of a PUD, and are there any examples of that?
What a good question. Who asked this?
Sue Scambolari.
Good question, Sue. Actually, Mike Rucker could maybe speak to it a little bit more, but we actually think it isn't possible. It's potentially not possible. So we are actually looking into that currently for a petition that is coming forward in the next couple months to Plan Commission. That's not something that we've really done in the past, and we are hesitant because when you take a plan unit development to council, again, they see it as a whole piece. And when they may be approving it because they like the way it works, the synergy of all the uses that are proposed, or the design, or just that there are a lot of factors that go into an approval or a denial. So if it's approved, we kind of see it as one package. So then when you start asking to change little pieces in that, it kind of, we're a little bit hesitant, and legal is currently kind of looking into whether or not that's actually even possible. Our code doesn't make it super clear that it is. Yeah, that's a good question. We're not sure of the answer, but we should know soon.
Okay, I have a question from Anne, and says, is there a complete list of PUDs that are being rezoned, and a list of those that are staying as a PUD?
Yes. So in the story map, hold on, let me pull it back up. Good question. That is what this list is. So it has the names, how the PUDs are identified, their PUD ID number, what year the last time they had a petition go forward, and then the zoning district that we recommended, and then a comment about what their what is at the site. But you can see in the list, so we have the recommended zoning districts, but you can see some of them say leave as PUD, or keep as PUD. Those are the two tags that we used for that. So yeah, that list you can get to through the story map. And then when you are on the map, oh, Ryan, did I do this right? Let's see, hold on. Oh yeah, when you click on one of the more colorful, so the non-grayed out are the PUDs, and when you click on them, and you, hold on, let me see if I can hide this. It shows you the PUD number here at the bottom. And so you can then go to the list and find which one that is. So I mentioned that because, you know, when you look at the list, you might not know, you might not be calling the place that you live or are interested in the name that was used when it got approved in, 1988. But you should be able to find that PUD number by clicking on the property that you're interested in and then cross-referencing it to the table to find whether or not, or what it's being proposed to be rezoned to, or whether or not it isn't being proposed, or whether it's not being proposed. Are there any more questions about PUDs? Okay, so for reference, I just want to remind people that we do have the UDO zoning map public outreach draft website. That's probably how most of you found this meeting. But we will be, we'll put the presentations up after the meeting, and then other resources. So our meetings, our general information meetings, these meetings will be over next week. And then the public, we expect that the public hearing process for Plan Commission will start at the end of January 2021. So in that time, we will be sharing resources and compiling questions and putting answers up on this website. So it will continue to grow even after these meetings are over. And so we ask, there will be right now, the mixed use student housing zoning district feedback form is up on the website. After Thursday, a new one will go up that will be for PUDs and the Plex R4 discussion. And we ask that you do get on and answer those. It helps us to be able to compile that information while we're looking at changes that will be made. So the draft that is out now is just a draft. And we do expect that some changes will be made both by staff and Plan Commission before it goes to council. Brian, did you get another question?
Yeah, so I had another question. It's about the big gray blob in the middle of the map that's at least partially the Thompson PUD. So they wanted to know if, Dave wanted to know if that was all the Thompson PUD or only part. And if all of the Thompson PUD, how did it get that large? Was it through expansions, or was it all done in one, as it was for the Habitat project?
Sure. Eric, do you want to answer these questions, or do you want me to answer?
Sure. No, so the Thompson PUD size of what you see there is exactly what was approved with the overall Thompson PUD back in the 90s. There was a small portion over on the southwest side there that was added just recently for the Habitat project. But overall, that is the size of the Thompson PUD. It was a very large factory, very large amount of area that was taken up. So that is something that we are looking at rezoning to current zoning districts and expiring that PUD as well.
Yes,
And
great.
we'll also mention that there is a second PUD that's attached to that. And so it appears on the map that it's one giant PUD. There's a second smaller one that touches.
Oh, got it. That's immediately adjacent to Thompson.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, we are looking at including that as well. As Eric mentioned, it's quite old. It's pretty complicated. Part of it was also in the Schmidt-Sudbury vision plan. And so we have part of it mapped out in that way. But we are still looking at that will potentially very likely show as zones when this goes forward to Plan Commission. Does anyone else have any questions?
I did receive a question. It's about the R4 zoning district more so than PUDs, but I could still ask, or whatever you.
Okay, go ahead. That's fine.
Sure. So this question is from Laura. Why the push to rezone the residential neighborhoods when so many are against the development of multiplex rental units, R4 especially, in their neighborhood? And also, if the goal is to create more sustainable housing and reduce carbon footprint, thereby addressing climate change and global warming, where's the proposal to require new multiplex dwellings to be carbon neutral?
Okay, yeah. So those are good and fair questions. I actually don't know if that person's still in here. Oh, I see you. Sorry. I thought you'd left. Yes, I would encourage you. Those are some very big questions, right, about R4, and we do want to discuss them. We are trying to keep those discussions to the next two meetings, not because we don't want to talk about it, because we do, but so that people won't miss the answers. And we would just, we will discuss those on Thursday. I can't remember if on the website, if it says R4 and plexes for Thursday, but obviously they're very intertwined. I would direct you to the website to look at the housing diversity story map, which answers, I think, a little bit of some of your questions, but we will definitely get way more into those in the coming meetings. And additionally, of course, once this actually goes to public hearings, the quick answer is, we still think that that it's the right thing to do. We hear the concerns, we understand what they are. We think and hope that some of them can be addressed, and that adding an option for plexes in the primarily residential areas of Bloomington, it goes a long way as part of a large group of proposals and programs to help address some of the issues that you mentioned. And yes, maybe there is more that can be done for environmental regulation as well. And that is something we could look into too. And does anyone else have any questions about PUDs? Okay, well, that's all we have. Again, I would direct you, this presentation will go up. If you have other interested parties who couldn't be here today that you know of, it will be on the website, and as well as the story map will be on the website that I went through. And as we did with the MS, I think I'll just go ahead and go through it again for those of you who weren't here at the beginning, and then we can do questions if you have any. Oh, Keegan, did you have another question?
No, I did not. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, it's okay. And then we can do more questions, and we'll staff will kind of hang around to answer those, as well as just in case anybody comes late with questions. So with that, if there are no more questions right now, I will go ahead and go through the story map again. Okay, so tonight's discussion is about proposed plan unit development rezones, which is part of the zoning map, proposed zoning map that we are doing with the update, the full update of the Unified Development Ordinance. So if you're unfamiliar, plan unit developments are unique zoning regulations for particular groups of parcels, and they're intended to promote a mix of uses and unique design. Excuse me, that could not otherwise be accomplished through regular zoning districts, right? So if someone has identified a particular set of uses they're interested in, or a site design that isn't going to be allowed, then council is allowed to look at those requests through plan unit development process and see if they meet the goals of the community and those that are required for plan unit developments, and can approve what basically amounts to a small zoning code for those lots. So the city of Bloomington currently has over 100 PUDs. Right now we have 119. Many of those areas we are proposing to rezone to base zoning districts with the zoning map update. So this story map in particular is, as I said, about the proposed changes to the existing PUDs. And then I'll go through an example in a little bit about how we came to the zoning districts that we are proposing. And then here's a little description here about how you can use the story map to go through and look through the PUD areas. It's similar if you've done some of the other ones. You can use this expand tool in the upper right, and that hides kind of the text, and you're able you're able to get to the map better without it being covered. And you can use the zoom, of course. And then you can also use the magnifying glass in the top left to find particular addresses. And then when you click on a PUD, it will give you a pop out that gives you the proposed zoning district as well as the PUD number, which is useful if you want to go use this link here, proposed PUD rezone list, to look at the PUDs and which are proposed to be rezoned and which are not. So you can use these buttons here to zoom to a certain extent, and then of course zoom in yourself over on the right. So why are we proposing to rezone PUDs in the first place? So the Unified Development Ordinance was written with the expectations that PUDs would be expired or rezoned to base districts at some point when they met certain thresholds, or after a period of inactivity, or if the PUD has changed in some way that's no longer operating within the guidelines of that PUD. So PUDs are eligible for expiration or rezone if any of the following triggers occur. At least 95% of the PUD has been built out. So basically, you know, the PUD is planned for. Final plans, or people call them site plans, are approved and built, and the PUD has met the intent of the original request. When a preliminary plan, which is what creates the PUD along with the district ordinance, shall be considered abandoned if 3 years after the approval, no final plan or site plan, which is what the final plan is, has been granted, or if 10 years after the approval, some final plans have been granted, but there are sections that remain without them. And then finally, as I said before, if a PUD is no longer proceeding in accordance with the original district ordinance or commitments or time requirements that were imposed by council initially. So of the 119 we are proposing to rezone 104, and they each at least fall under at least one of those triggers. So the reason that we're proposing to do it as part of the zoning map update is, as I mentioned, code does want us to regularly review them as staff and expire them. And that has been a very difficult task in the past. We have all paper files going back, obviously, decades and decades, and that some of these PUDs have been amended many times. And so it's a laborious process to kind of do the things that need to be done to verify these PUDs. And one of those that has improved over the years is being able to check for 95% build out. So you still need to review all the case files and check for building permits. And but instead of having to visit each site separately, we now, of course, are able to use our easy access to orthophotography to see what has been built. And of course, having some of our files digitized, which we're in the process of having all of our files done, has been helpful as well. So that makes it a little bit easier. And then the second thing is that we have to send notice, obviously, of course, to the entire city for the zoning map update. And we would have to send notice as well for a rezone of the PUDs. So in order to do that in a more efficient way, to include it during the zoning map update makes sense, to include it all as one notice, one full repeal and replace of the map, including the PUD sections, is cleaner and less expensive, obviously, of course, for the taxpayer, and maybe easier to understand for the property owners involved as well. So I'm going to briefly talk about an example. So as I mentioned before, we have a lot of PUDs in town, 119. This one, for example, is a one lot PUD. So this PUD is at Kinzer and the Bypass, and the Kroger was approved. I'm sorry, there's a Kroger located there. It was approved by Plan Commission in 1991. And the idea of the planning and development at that time, it was supposed to be a creation of a neighborhood shopping area to serve the nearby residential properties. And previously it had been zoned for single family residential. So the site plan that was included with that PUD and later approved with the development plan showed a grocery anchor store on the west and an area for smaller scale commercial development on the east, with a parking lot area in the center facing the bypass. So that was the site plan. And then PUDs are also often designed with particular use regulations. And the way that works typically is that the petitioner will use the uses listed in the zoning code at that time to create a list of those uses that they desire to have at the site. So they, in some instances, when it's multi-property plan unit development, they may be able to identify some lots as, for example, MC zoning, and other lots MM, and then we would use the zoning code at that time to look at the uses allowed for those district names and know that they intended to have those on the separate lots. What often happens in PUDs is that they will add uses that don't appear in particular districts or delete uses. So each PUD typically ends up with its own use list. So again, that is separate from the zoning code and only approved for that particular PUD. And then the zoning code changes over time. So for this PUD to have been approved in 1991, the use list that was even the base before they changed it has changed quite a bit. So this PUD features a list of land uses that would be allowed in Area A on the eastern portion of the lot. And then they also have a restriction on maximum square footage for those uses, which is not something from our current code, or that has lived through to our current code. So basically every time a prospective user wants to go in there and they want to see if the use that they have is allowed, there's nowhere simple for them to find that answer. They have to go through staff who has to pull the old information and make sure and let them know if what they're asking to do is allowed. Another little hurdle to that is that some of these PUDs have excluded use lists as well. And a lot of these uses listed here no longer exist in the zoning code. So it makes it a little bit difficult to compare and contrast the zoning codes over time. So that goes obviously, of course, also for the allowed use table as well. So during this process that we're proposing, all of those kind of hiccups for that stall development or make due diligence difficult for property owners would go away, because they would be able to use the regular zoning code and use the use lists for each district listed there. The other issue is that a lot of planning unit developments also have development standard restrictions. Some, again, are particular to the property, that maybe they didn't even get from the code at the time, but others do come from the code at the time. And sometimes those older regulations no longer meet the goals of our current long-range plans. For example, our current comprehensive plan, or other priorities that have kind of taken the limelight more in regulations since the original PUD is approved. So for example, environmental goals or architectural goals. So in this example, the required minimum setback allows that parking, or basically requires that parking be in front of the primary structure. That has not been, that is not conducive with our UDO, and has not been since at least 2007, where we as a community have been trying to push the buildings forward on a lot with parking hidden in the back. But because this PUD has its own set of regulations, any new development that would go in under the PUD would have to meet these requirements unless they went through council to have those changed. And again, it just makes it difficult for developers, especially some who may know, may be familiar with using zoning codes, go to the zoning code, for example, and see that we are promoting building forward all over town in the commercial areas. And then once contacting staff, finding out that actually these old PUDs don't support that, and that they have separate regulations, it can make that difficult. So as I mentioned before, the PUDs are actually not intended to exist in perpetuity. We have guidelines for expirations, and we, with the process of going through this process of identifying the PUDs, we came up again with 104 PUDs, which are eligible, we think, for rezone based on the 4 criteria I mentioned at the beginning. We looked at the goals and objectives and uses in the original PUD and compared them to the comprehensive plan and the base zoning districts that we have in the new zoning code, and then identified zoning districts that best match the goals set out by those documents. So for example, the original goal of this PUD, as I mentioned at the beginning, was to create a grocery store and allow for development of other neighborhood serving commercial spaces on the east. Comprehensive plan identifies this area as urban corridor, which allows and expects development of commercial and mixed use. The department identified the zoning district mixed use corridor, which most closely aligned with the goals of the original PUD and of the comprehensive plan. So we are recommending rezone to mixed use corridor for this PUD. So it would keep the existing uses on the lot permitted, because grocery store and the other retail uses are permitted uses in NMC. And what it is helpful for into the future is that if this lot were to redevelop, or any additional develop, for example, an outlot being created or something were to be done, then we would have much cleaner regulations for a potential developer to use, to know what is expected of that development, as opposed to having to go back and explain to them the PUD that was created 30 years ago and that they needed to follow those requirements. Instead, we can just direct them to the UDO and they can find the answers there. So there are about 15 PUDs that we did not recommend to be rezoned at this time. And for various reasons, some are fairly new, and most of the ones that we recommended or all of the ones that we recommended to stay are either new, or they have a fairly new development in them, or their regulations are so complicated that at this time there didn't appear to be a way to apply the typical zoning districts to those areas of the PUD. So those that are under current development or recently approved, we will then review yearly to see if they've met any of those 4 thresholds we talked about at the beginning. And if they have, we will do the same review process that we did for the 104 PUDs, and we will recommend to council a rezone to an existing base district based on that review and what seems appropriate for those. So let's see as we go back up here. So you can see on this map, the gray areas are those that remain PUD. So some up here in the north, and then Thompson, which was pointed out earlier in the questions, which this very likely will become zoning districts in the proposal that goes to Plan Commission. Okay, so if you have any questions, I think this is all the same. I don't think we have any new people, but if you do have any questions, send them to Ryan Roebling or Keegan Gulick, and they will read them, and we'll try to answer them or take them down to get you an answer.
I have a question, Jackie.
Great.
This is from Emily from the HT. She asks, does the UDO allow for PUDs to be designated in the future if such an opportunity would arise?
Yes, so great question. I should have said that. Yes, we still have a PUD section and in the UDO, and it's still very much an option. It's different. Some of the regulations have changed from previous previous PUD allowance regulations. But it's definitely still an option for property in the future. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm just going to show again the website. And then if you all don't have questions, staff will probably just hang around in case people come late, or if you think of things, you feel free to ask. But let me pull the website up just to remind everybody where it is. Okay, so here is the website, bloomington.in.gov/planning/UDO/map/updates. And these information sessions will be over next week. This is not part of the public hearing process. This is just public outreach that we wanted to get feedback on the map and the text amendments that we are planning to propose some version of to Plan Commission at the beginning of next year. So those meetings will be over, but this website will stay live, and we will be adding information and analysis as we're getting those things done, and also responses to questions that we receive from the public through the website and from the meetings that we've had. Those will go here as well. These presentations and the story maps will be here also. So please do visit that. Right now we have our mixed use student housing zoning district feedback form up. That will stay up through Thursday, and then we will change that to a feedback form addressing this meeting and the R4plex meetings, either at the end of the week or potentially after the second R4plex meeting. Might make more sense to wait. So that will be changing sometime shortly. If no one else has any questions, we will just hang around to see if anything comes up. And otherwise, please do come back and join us on Thursday at 5:30 for questions related, for presentation related to the plexes and R4 discussion. And we'll be sure to have lots of questions there as well. And we look forward to those additional meetings. So sorry, one on Thursday, one on next Monday, and then a meeting next Tuesday related to other text amendments that we will likely bring forward to Plan Commission. So thank you all very much for being here. We really appreciate your participation and questions.